motionless, breathing slowly, watching her even while she sleeps. A candle flickers, illuminating her face for just seconds, long enough to reveal her sunken eyes. She trembles, not from cold, from absence. Weeks ago, she stopped being the Queen. Here, she has another name, Prisoner Number 280. This is not a romantic tale or an exaggerated tragedy. This is methodical dehumanization. Where once there were gold-framed mirrors, now there are walls sweating moisture. Where once there was music, now only the crackling of the candle and the echo of boots in the corridor. Where once there were children running through gardens, now only questions piercing her chest. Are they alive? Will they remember my voice? In this dark place, in this crushing silence, the real story begins. Not at the guillotine, not in revolutionary speeches, not in propaganda. Here where they tried to break her before killing her. Here where the woman who symbolized wealth became a symbol of guilt. But what no one expected was this: the revolution couldn't destroy the one thing she never let go, her dignity, and that's what turns her ending into something deeper than political punishment. Because the real question isn't how she died. The real question is, what did they do to her before? And why wasn't the guillotine the worst part? But everything they forced her to endure before reaching it. If you want to understand this story with the truth and emotion you've never been told, stay with me. And if this type of deep historical content interests you, subscribe and leave a like. It helps tremendously in bringing you more real stories like this. Long before becoming France's most watched prisoner, Marie Antoinette had been something else. A teenager ripped from Austria and sold as a diplomatic piece. She was 14 when they sent her to Versailles, a palace where every gesture carried weight, where every glance could become rumour and every rumour could become poison. In Austria, they saw her as a bridge to France. In France, an intruder with a foreign accent. The seed of hatred was planted early. As political tension grew, she learned to survive among mirrors, diamonds, and false smiles. Versailles wasn't beauty, it was theatre, and Marie Antoinette, without wanting it, became the protagonist of a play she didn't write. When economic crisis hit, the people's rage sought a visible target. Ministers' faces weren't on pamphlets. Royal signatures on taxes weren't on walls. The image everywhere was hers. The young queen, the foreigner, the Irish spendthrift. The woman propaganda turned into a monster. They painted her as witch, traitor, libertine. They even invented that she'd said, "Let them eat cake," a lie so useful it became truth. Because the revolution didn't need proof. It needed a villain easy to hate. And they found one. The royal family tried to escape at Varennes. They almost made it, but someone recognized them. They stopped their carriage just miles from freedom. When the mob dragged them back to Paris, the carriage windows dripped with spit. The smell of raw fury filled the air. From that day forward, Marie Antoinette stopped being a person. She was reduced to a political object, a trophy, a warning, the living representation of what the revolution promised to destroy. The following months were a slow stripping. First the house, then freedom, then her friendships, and finally, the most painful, her children. Some revolutionaries thought it would be enough to execute her quickly, as they'd done with the king. But no, the leaders wanted more. They wanted public humiliation. They wanted to see her cruel before dying. They wanted the entire world to witness how a queen is destroyed. When they took her to the conciergerie, they did so with a silent message. Here we stop punishing the queen and start breaking the woman. No more silk dresses, no more court rituals, no more music or gardens, only a cell sharp as a sentence and a new name marked in the records, prisoner number 280. But though they stripped everything from her, they didn't achieve what they wanted most, to see her broken. The people's hatred grew outside, but within those damp walls something began to form that even her enemies never imagined. A silent dignity, hardened by loss. And the worst hadn't even begun yet. The conciergerie was known by one name, the antechamber of death. They led her down a narrow corridor where the air smelled of ancient moisture and wet clothes. The walls absorbed heat from passing bodies. Each step echoed like a blow, marking her fate. The jailer said nothing, just opened the door with a long, cruel creak. She entered. The door slammed shut with a sound like a sentence. The cell was a stone cube where time stopped. A bed of damp straw. A bucket. A crooked table. A window too high to see the sky. And a constant sound. Water dripping through the walls. Drip. After drip. After drip. But the worst wasn't the stone. It was the eyes that never stopped watching. 2 guards. Day and night. Without blinking. Without speaking. Just watching her. Monitoring every breath, every gesture, every attempt at dignity. She couldn't even change clothes without feeling those stares piercing her skin. She asked for privacy and got silence, sometimes a mocking smile, sometimes only their breathing as they watched. The surveillance wasn't for security, it was to break her. The revolution wanted to destroy royalty, but in the conciergerie, they wanted something else, to destroy the woman. Time stopped being measured in hours. It was measured in guard footsteps, distant slams, muffled cries from other prisoners. Sometimes, when someone was taken to trial, the others remained in heavy silence, imagining whether that person would return. Marie Antoinette slept little. When she closed her eyes, she saw the scene that haunted her since that cursed July. The temple door breaking, the screams, her 8-year-old son clinging to her dress, her own hands torn from his. "He's only a child," she had begged, her most useless phrase, and the truest she'd spoken in years. That night broke her, not as queen, as mother. Every dawn in the conciergerie began the same. She woke sweating, groping for the small portrait of her son hidden near her chest, pressing it like a still-beating heart. That memory was all she had left. Still, the guards tried taking it, searching her dresses, pockets, hands. She resisted, protected that portrait like her own breath. Sometimes her only human company was Rosalie, the young woman who brought food. Rosalie saw what others didn't, a woman who no longer cried for herself, but for what had been stolen. She broke only when speaking of her children, repeated their names in whispers, like prayers, and recovered in silence, refusing to yield to cruelty. In that dark cell, surrounded by moisture, surveillance, and contempt, Marie Antoinette understood something no one expected. They couldn't do anything worse. She had already lost everything, and when someone loses everything, they stop being afraid. That's how the unsettling calm was born that would confound everyone. A calm that didn't come from hope, but from acceptance. While the city roared outside with rumours, trials, hatred, and chants, in the conciergerie, the most silent tragedy unfolded. A woman being stripped of everything that defined her humanity, and yet still resisting. On October 14, 1793, before dawn, the guard's footsteps shattered the corridor's monotony. Marie Antoinette slowly lifted her head. She knew what that sound meant. The door opened and torchlight entered like a blade. She stood with a calm that surprised even the guards who escorted her day and night. They led her through the conciergerie's damp corridors. The air smelled of mould, sweat, and old fear. Soldiers guarding the route removed their hats as she passed, not from respect, but because something in her presence demanded silence, a dignity the revolution hadn't extinguished. When they brought her outside, the morning cold hit full force. She wore the black dress she'd used to mourn her husband. She walked with her back straight, unhurried, without trembling. The tribunal was packed. It wasn't a courtroom. It was theatre, a spectacle so the people could watch the woman they'd learned to hate. Judges sat on high platforms, prosecutors and secretaries to her right, an audience hungry for scandal in front. And in the centre, a simple wooden bench where she was forced to sit. Prosecutor Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville opened with a voice made to provoke. Each phrase was a verbal stab seeking applause. Treason against the nation. Collaboration with foreign powers. Squandering the people's wealth. Corrupting France's morals. A list of sins written by her enemies. Marie Antoinette listened in silence, responded only when forced with short, firm phrases, not to convince them. She knew the condemnation was written months ago. The tribunal needed something more. It needed a spectacle. Then came the vilest accusation, paralyzing even hardened revolutionaries, that she had committed incest with her own son Louis Charles. A frozen murmur ran through the hall. Even some present lowered their gaze. She remained motionless, didn't blink, didn't breathe, made of stone. The judges waited for her defense, the audience for her indignation, the guards for her collapse. None came. Marie Antoinette rose slowly, didn't look at the prosecutor, nor the judges, nor the pamphlet writers with twisted smiles. She looked directly at the market women admitted to witness, women who had marched on Versailles, women who had insulted, blamed, persecuted her. With a clear voice, firm, almost maternal, "I appeal to all the mothers who are here, nothing more." She didn't need to. The hall froze. Murmurs died. Some women began to cry. In that instant, the pamphlet monster vanished. The hated queen became what she'd always been, a mother brutally separated from her child. Then she sank back onto the bench, drained. She had said everything. Tinville slammed the table furiously, but something had broken in the atmosphere. The crowd still hated her. But now, they also saw her. They saw a woman. The trial continued 2 more days. The outcome was decided. Guilty of high treason. The sentence, death. When asked if she had anything to say, what more could I add? Her dignity was stronger than the tribunal's script. While the crowd celebrated, the most unexpected element emerged, a silent force that didn't come from the crown, but from suffering. The revolution wanted to destroy the queen, but what emerged was the woman, the most dangerous of all, a woman with nothing left to lose. The night before she died, Marie Antoinette returned to her cell like a shadow. The trial had ended hours ago, but the verdict's weight had been crushing her for days. Crossing the door, Rosalie, her young attendant, saw her paler than ever, with an almost invisible tremor in her hands. The silence in the conciergerie was different that night. It wasn't the usual silence of stone and moisture. It was denser, heavier, as if the walls knew the fate of the woman sleeping within them. Marie Antoinette sat at the wooden table, the same one where she had so often rested her forehead, to cry without tears. She took out a piece of paper, a worn quill, and breathed deeply. The candle flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to surround her. And she began to write. She didn't write about injustice. She didn't write about hatred. She wrote about love, about her sister, Madame Elisabeth, about her daughter, about Louis Charles, the boy she knew nothing about since they'd torn him from her arms. Her words were soft, almost a whisper. "Don't blame my son. They forced him. He was deceived. I still love him." She wrote that even in heaven she would still be his mother, that he shouldn't carry the weight of words others put in his mouth, that she forgave him, that she would always forgive him. Each sentence seemed to release a piece of her weary soul. It was her moral testament, forgiveness instead of resentment, kindness instead of hatred. When she finished, she left the letter on the table, and the candle illuminated the fresh ink for a moment. That writing never reached her family's hands. The revolutionaries confiscated it and buried it in hidden archives, as if even her last words were dangerous. Rosalie saw her sigh as she extinguished the candle with her fingers. "Can I bring you food, Your Majesty?" She smiled with a sweetness that seemed impossible within that prison. "No, my child, everything is finished for me." Then she knelt on the stone floor and prayed. She didn't ask to be saved. She didn't ask for miracles. She asked for courage to die without fear. She asked for peace for her children. She asked for forgiveness, for those who hated her. When she rose, something in her expression had changed. There was no more resistance, only serenity. She slept a few minutes, her head resting on her arm, right there where she'd written her last letter. Her breathing was slow, deep, as if her body was already releasing what her mind had accepted days before. At dawn, the jailer's footsteps sounded again. The door opened abruptly. A dry voice announced, "It is time." Marie Antoinette straightened slowly. Rosalie was crying. The Queen took her hands and whispered, "Don't cry for me. I have suffered too much to fear death." The guards gave the order. She must change. She asked for privacy. They laughed. They forced her to undress behind a poorly placed screen where they could still see her. They handed her a rough white linen dress, shapeless, without history, a dress to die in. Then came the most humiliating moment of all. "We must cut your hair," said Executioner Sanson. She bowed her head without protest. Rusty scissors tore through entire strands. White threads, white from fear, from confinement, from exhaustion, fell to the floor like remains of a life that no longer existed. When they finished, Sanson said, "We must bind your hands." She responded with a serene voice, almost sad. "Why, my husband was not bound." No one answered. They tightened her wrists until leaving deep marks on her skin. Then, without a tear, without a tremor, she took a step toward the door. The moment had arrived, and she would face it the only way that still belonged to her, with dignity. The conciergerie door opened for the last time. When it did, Marie Antoinette was already standing, as if she'd been waiting for that moment for hours. 2 guards walked ahead, another behind, and between them, Marie Antoinette moved with short steps, wrists bound, hair freshly cut, gaze fixed ahead. The cold morning air hit her immediately. A thick fog enveloped Paris, as if the entire city wanted to hide what it was about to witness. In the courtyard waited a wooden cart, the same type of open wagon used for common criminals. There were no privileges for dying. She climbed without help. She stood upright, erect, as if her body refused to bend before the crowd. The cart began moving slowly. Each jolt over irregular stones made her sway, but she didn't hold on to anything. She let her body move with the road's brutal rhythm, as if it no longer belonged to her. The sound of hooves on stone echoed through empty streets, and soon the silences filled with voices. As they advanced, people emerged from houses, markets, alleyways. Some shouted insults, others laughed, others simply watched in silence. But what was most disturbing wasn't the hatred, it was her silence. Marie Antoinette didn't respond to any shout, didn't lower her gaze, didn't cry, didn't